Welcome everyone, this is Kerjims channel. Now we are back to our new episodes of two similarity champions and comparison, featured by Wild League of Legend versus the Mobile Legend Bang Bang. But before that, please like and subscribe to my channel and don't forget to click the bell icon to be notified to our new next episode video. Let's do this!
Sylas of Dreadborn was perhaps doomed from the start. Despite their low social standing, his parents were firm believers in their country's ideals. So when they discovered their son was afflicted with magical abilities, they convinced him to turn himself in to the kingdom's mage seekers. Noting the boy's curious ability to sense magic, they used Sylas to identify other mages living among the citizenry. For the first time in his life, he felt he had a future, a life in service to his country, and he performed these duties faithfully. He was proud, but lonely, forbidden from associating with anyone but his handlers. Through his work, Sylas began to notice that magic was far more prevalent than Demacian cared to admit. He could sense glimmers of hidden power, even among the wealthy and prominent, some of whom were the most outspoken decriers of mages. But while the poor were punished for their afflictions, the elite seemed above the law, and this hypocrisy planted the first seeds of doubt in Sylas's mind. Those doubts finally bloomed in one deadly, fateful event when Sylas and his handlers encountered a mage living in hiding in the countryside. After discovering it was only a young girl, Sylas took pity on her. When he tried to shield the child from the mage seekers, he accidentally brushed against her skin. The girl's magic rushed through Sylas's body, but rather than killing him, it shot forth from his hands in raw, uncontrolled bursts. It was a talent he did not know he possessed, and it resulted in the deaths of 3 people, including his mage seeker mentor. Knowing he would be called a murderer, Sylas went on the run, and quickly gained notoriety as one of the most dangerous mages in Demacia. Indeed, when the mage seekers found him, they showed no mercy. Though he was still just a youth, Sylas was sentenced to life imprisonment. He languished in the darkest depths of the mage seeker compound, forced to wear heavy shackles of magic dampening patricite. Robbed of his arcane sight, his heart turned as hard as the stone that bound him, and he dreamed of vengeance on all who had put him there. After 15 wretched years, a young volunteer from the Illuminators, named Luxana, began to visit him. Even with his shackles, Sylas recognized her as a singularly powerful mage, and over time, the two forged an unusual and secretive bond. In exchange for Sylas's knowledge of the control of magic, Lux educated him about the world outside his cell, and brought him whatever books he desired. Eventually, through careful manipulation, he convinced the girl to smuggle a forbidden tome into his cell, the original writings of the great sculptor Durand, detailing his work with patricite. The work revealed the secrets of the stone to Sylas. It was the foundation of Demacian's defenses against harmful sorcery, but he came to see that it did not suppress magic, but absorb it. And if the power was held within the patricite, Sylas wondered, could he release it? All he needed was a source of magic, a source like Lux. But she never visited Sylas again. Her family, the immensely powerful Crown Guards, had learned of their contact and were furious that Lux had broken the law to help this vile criminal. Without explanation, it was arranged for Sylas to be hanged. At the gallows, Lux pleaded for her friend's life, but her cries fell on deaf ears. As the hangman pushed past her to tighten the noose, Sylas managed to touch against Lux with his chains.
I am sorry, little light.
As he had predicted, her power surged into the patricite shackles, ready for him to unleash.
I'll show you magic!
And with that stolen magic, Sylas blasted his way free, sparing only the terrified young Crown Guard.
Remember that kind of
He left the Mage Seeker compound, not as an outcast, but as a new, defiant symbol of the broken and persecuted in Demacia. Traveling the kingdom in secret, he has amassed a following of exiled mages, all now aligned toward a common goal: to topple the throne and demolish the oppressive system that has made them suffer for so long.
After a day of marching east towards the Avarosan territory, the Winter's Claw raid finally took a break to stretch their limbs. Thorva sensed a storm coming, but Brina didn't respond to her warning. Instead, she continued staring south with her one good eye. Brina mentioned that she can see something in the distance, but when Thorva joined her, she couldn't see anything. Brina mocked her that even though Thorva had two eyes, she was more blind than Brina. This little interaction ignited deep hatred in Thorva, revealing that she was quick to anger, and she forced herself to take a deep breath to calm down. Here the story revealed that Thorva joins the raid party uninvited. Initially, Brina protested against her, but with her connection to the old gods of Freljord, the Shamanka clearly had a reason to come as well. But to that moment, Brina still didn't know why the gods wanted Thorva to join them. Brina pointed at a rocky cliff in the distance, and Thorva finally saw as well. There was a lone figure, little more than a shadow against the snow. An itching sensation prickled the back of Thorva's neck, and she sensed there was something strange about that figure. Vrina knew it couldn't be an Avarosan scout, because they marched right through the icy winds. Not even a child of Freljord would make that mistake. The only other option was that it was a trader from the south. After all, the Avarosans traded with the Southerners instead of taking from them. After that realization, Vrina simply turned her Druvas around so they could keep going. But Thorva stayed behind. She mentioned that they might have been spotted, but Brina replied that this fool won't survive the coming storm anyway. That didn't make Thorva's itching sensation go away. And so, when Brina asked Thorva if she's coming with them, Thorva replied no, and she started marching towards the figure. After she left, Brokvar Ironfist, another member of the raid, insisted that they had to go after her. The gods would bring ruin upon them if anything happened to their Shamanka. Brokvar was an Iceborn, and so he wielded the legendary blade called Winter's Wail, a weapon infused with true ice. Which means that no one, not even Brina, besides the Iceborn could wield it. To anyone else, it would bring insufferable pain. Brina herself wasn't superstitious, but some of her warriors, including Brokvar, were, and so, against her better judgment, Brina signaled the raiding party to follow Thorva. As the raid kept following the stranger, Brina realized more and more how unprepared they were for the frozen tundra. Had she rode away, that stranger would die within an hour. As Thorva got closer to the outsider, she noticed it was a man dressed in fur that carried no weapon. There was only a pair of chains attached to a curious design clamped around his wrist. The story then shifted to the perspective of Sylas of Dragonborn. Sylas underestimated the sheer hostility of the Freljordian landscape. He knew there was great magical power in the north, and now he could practically feel it in his bones. But it still seemed like a mistake to come here. He had a dozen hand-picked mages with him on this expedition, but they had all fallen one by one, claimed by the blizzard and the savage beast. He thought the barbarians would be the main threat, but Sylas hadn't seen a single living soul in weeks. And it's not like they came here unprepared. They had plenty of fur, food, weapons, and stolen Demacian coin to spare. They even brought a furred oxen with them. But none of it withstood the harsh climate. Only Sylas remained by sheer force of will. Here we learned that Sylas learned about the ancient magic of the north from one of the books Lux brought him to his cell, when he was still a Demacian prisoner. And unfortunately, he was stubborn enough to follow that power, but his stubbornness wasn't enough to overcome the cold. He was approaching his limits, as his hands and toes started turning black. Sometime back, he saw a column of riders in the distance, but he wasn't sure if he imagined it. He knew that to stop was to die, so he kept marching until his body finally gave up, and he fell face first into the snow. Thorva shook her head as she saw the outsider fall, and she urged her Druvas forward. As she approached Sylas, she had a chance to inspect him. Once again, she wondered about the chains. If he was a prisoner, where did he escape from? The Aberrusans wouldn't chain someone anyway, so he had to come from over the distant mountains in the south. Thorva grabbed her staff with both hands and she used it to leverage Sylas and turn him over. It was a difficult task since Sylas' shackles were incredibly heavy. And again, Thorva inspected the chains. She had traveled across the entire Freljord, but she had never seen a white stone similar to the shackles. There was something unsettling about it, and when she realized that the chains were made in a way so that they could never be removed, it became clear the man must have committed a terrible crime. As Thorva knelt there in the snow beside Sylas, she wondered why had she been guided here. The gods had clearly brought her here, just as they had directed her in the past. But she didn't know why. Was she meant to save the dying man before her? Or was the thing the man brought with him important? She quickly made her decision, and she reached for the bonds. But before she was even able to touch the veil stone, her fingers began to tingle, and Sylas' eyes snapped open. Thorva tried to summon her god-given powers, but as Sylas grabbed her arm, she felt those powers being drained from her. Her body suddenly felt cold, a sensation which she hadn't felt in years, and she fell, unable to breathe or move or do anything. As the cold took her, she saw colors return to the stranger's face, as if he was warmed by hugs. There was a hint of a smile on his lips, as he thanked her. Vrina cursed as she saw the shamanka fall, and with her roar, the raiding party moved forward. The ground was now shaking beneath the thundering charge, with the sound of an avalanche. Vrina saw the outsider kneeling beside Thorva, and she was surprised to see the man took off his fur to drape it over the fallen shamanka. It was a strangely kind gesture. Sylas then stood and faced the earth-shaking approach. Seeing the force that was now charging towards him, he stepped away from the fallen shamanka, and he held his hands up to show he bore no weapons. But Vrina didn't care. Without a signal, Vrina's warriors fanned out to encircle him. As Sylas' gaze darted between the riders, he showed no fear. But what was even more curious, he threw away his fur, and yet he didn't seem to feel the cold. Vrina ordered one of her riders to approach the fallen shamanka. Then she introduced herself. The man in front of her just cocked his head to one side, and he responded in a tongue she could not understand. Vrina girl, you don't understand me, do you? Yeah. And again, the man gave her a questioning look. Sylas, he replied, tapping his chest. Vrina understood that was probably his name. The warrior attending the shamanka confirmed that she was half frozen, but she wasn't dead yet. This made the riders confused. The Sisters of Frost were supposed to be immune to the cold. That was their gift from the old gods. But now, Thorva was freezing while the strangers stood before them with bare skin. All Vrina trusted was steel, fire, and blood, but she knew her warriors would see this as some kind of omen. Sylas then shouted something in his tongue again, but Vrina ignored it. She would rather kill this fool quickly and be on her way. But before she could do anything, Brokvar interrupted her. He offered to kill the stranger himself. The outsider killed their shamanka. It would be an honor to punish the man. Vrina raised her eyebrow, and with a shrug, she let him have his way. And so Brokvar dropped off his mount, and he marched towards Sylas with the legendary Winter's Wail in his hand. The story then cuts to one of Thorva's memories, specifically to one where she was 6 years old. That was the last time she had truly felt the cold. She was chasing a snow hare out onto a frozen lake. She was laughing, until she realized that the ice beneath her started to crack. Moments later, she plunged into the icy black depths. The bone-chilling cold drove all air from her lungs, and her limbs stiffened in agonizing cramps. She died that day, and she stayed dead for long minutes, before her tribe's shaman pulled her out and poured life back into her. She first manifested her god's-given power that night. The shaman told young Thorva that sometimes those who were brought back from the realm beyond changed. Realm beyond being capitalized. And it seemed like the gods had decided to bless Thorva. In the days that followed, Thorva found herself impervious to cold, being able to walk through freezing blizzards bare-skinned with no ill effects. That was the past. But now, Thorva once again found herself sinking into the cold. Only this time, there wasn't anyone who could pull her back up. As life slowly left her, she wondered, why was she brought here? Was her purpose to give her life to the outsider, so that they could fulfill the god's task? Suddenly she felt fear that slowed her descent into the darkness. Even if the gods wanted the outsider to take her place, Thorva knew that Vrina wouldn't allow them to live, and so Thorva began to fight back towards the surface. Meanwhile, Brokvar Iron Fist went straight for the killing blow, Winter's Wail hissing through the air. That blow would have split an ice troll in half, but Sylas was surprisingly quick, even with his massive shackles. He stepped back and whipped his chains at Brokvar, barely missing him as the Iceborn warrior snarled in fury. Brokvar was exceptionally fast for such a big man, and he was able to land a powerful backhand punch across the side of Sylas' head, a punch that sent him flying. Sylas struggled to get himself off the ground as Brokvar marched towards him, but finally, he regained his footing, which actually impressed Vrina. But still, Vrina knew he was just delaying the inevitable outcome. As the enemy approached, Sylas focused on the barbarian's weapon. A pale ice shard in its hilt was glowing brightly. Its magic was primal and dangerous, unlike anything he had seen before. It was almost intoxicating. With a roar, Sylas lashed his chains at Brokvar in a flurry of arcs. One of the swings hit Brokvar's head, and his helmet was torn off. Brokvar shook his long hair loose, spat blood into the snow, and continued his advance. The next time the chains flew at him, Brokvar let them whip around his massive forearm, and he grabbed the metal links to pull Sylas right into his swinging elbow. The hit brought Sylas to the ground again, and the Iceborn warrior was ready to deliver the killing blow with his blade. That's when a voice interrupted them, and Brokvar paused.